What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I wanted to break down what's happening with Tesla SPY and the overall markets. I'm going to talk about why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely crazy day as we have Nvidia's earnings, how Tesla still depends on Nvidia to some extent when it comes to developing their AI training functions and factors like that. And also what I think about Nvidia's earnings. I'll be talking about that as well in this video. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY in uninvested cash. The offer ends very soon at the end of March, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, as far as Tesla's going, as you guys can tell, there's a big downtrend that's been perpetuating the stock for the time being, which is not so great, at least for lots of these investors who are trying to buy it up as this thing was running. And we're also looking at this gap down here on Tesla, especially if we end up losing our 200 EMA on the daily time frame. We have this giant gap all the way down around this 250 area. We have a big support at 275 as well. That's going to be like previous resistance becoming support. So those are some very, very key levels Tesla could be visiting. But whether or not we go straight down to fill that gap or if we get a big bounce first depends a lot on Nvidia's earnings. And believe it or not, Tesla is dependent on Nvidia. They will be affecting us. Now, we're trying to hold this support right here, right? There's times where Tesla dipped, it maintained the downtrend, but then we got this bounce off the trend line. So right here, we got this bounce, then we continue to fall. We hit this trend line again, and then we ended up bouncing off of it. And then now we're at this trend line again. So are we about to see some kind of bounce before we continue to fall? Or do we just dump from here? It depends on Nvidia's earnings. I'll talk more about the charts in just a couple of minutes, but I want to talk about why Nvidia is going to be very important for Tesla and some Tesla news first. So as a reminder, the market was absolutely insane today. We saw Tesla down 8%. There's many reasons for why that happened. I went over the news in a lot of details, but as a reminder, the NHTSA is cutting a part of their workforce, but despite that, they're still keeping many of their positions that are critical to save lives in their view, and they're going to continue their Tesla investigations. Once again, I went over this in more detail. That was not the best of news for Tesla. Secondly, we're looking at Tesla's sales continuing to fall in Europe. They're actually down 45% compared to a year ago. Not the best of news for Tesla. There's a lot of fear right now about Tesla's sales declining in Europe, and this is what helped to trigger the sell-off. It did contribute to why that happened. We're seeing the lowest amount of sales in Europe in 2 years for Tesla. Not the best of news. So unfortunately, that's why Tesla sold off the way it did. But whether or not we get some kind of bounce or continue to dump is now going to depend on Nvidia. So as a reminder, Tesla was down very, very hard. Big tech were in the red. Some health stocks were a little bit more in the green. And overall, the market was more mixed, especially with other sectors. But tech remains a little bit weaker. Now, for stocks like Tesla, it's worth mentioning that Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, was praising Tesla and their ability to integrate over 100,000 H200 GPUs. That has never been done before. And they're putting their GPUs to use because of AI training. In fact, Tesla is one of the biggest holders of Nvidia's H100 GPUs as well. They have like a private cloud type. What's very important is that they're using this for AI training. They're using this to develop their gigafactories and for a bunch of different things. The supercomputers are very, very key for the learning that they're using for their robotaxi and a bunch of different things like that. So I want to make it very, very clear that Tesla is going to be affected by NVIDIA, believe it or not. And that's why I believe it's very important for me to talk about NVIDIA's earnings. Today, the market also sold off because we had consumer confidence at a very, very low level. And that's why NVIDIA's earnings is going to be very important to help offset this. Now, tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, February 26, 2025. There's not really much data coming out. We just have a couple of Fed speakers, new home sales at 10 a.m., but everything is going to be very, very quiet. So just keep that in mind. There's nothing too crazy except for NVIDIA's earnings. Now, before the market opens, we have Lowe's announcing earnings, and then after market close, we have NVIDIA making their very important earnings announcements. We also have Snow, AI, and Salesforce, but NVIDIA is going to be the big one. So what is NVIDIA going to do? What do I think about the share price? How is this going to affect Tesla? Let's talk about this. Right now, NVIDIA has an inverse head and shoulders like pattern, and we need to see it bounce right here to start pushing higher. If not, we're looking for a big rug pull. We'll look at some historical data. Just know that NVIDIA tends to do well during earnings, but this is what investors are expecting. We're expecting NVIDIA, which is the biggest AI and GPU developer, at least in the world right now. They have insane demand, at least according to their reports, and they're expecting to report about 84 cents per share for their EPS, reflecting a 63% increase year over year. We're also expecting revenue to be at about 72% of an increase. That's reaching $38.08 billion. Now, they are known for achieving that and typically beating on earnings, at least the majority of the time, but that's not the most important thing. What's important is going to be seeing them develop more of these chips and then maintaining the expectations that Wall Street has. The majority of time, Nvidia has very, very nice guidances, and that's what really helps them to a much larger extent. So what they tell us for this year, what they tell us for the upcoming quarter is going to be huge. There's a lot of fear right now about how inflation's going up. We're seeing more tariffs, and Nvidia has to really offset all these fears during their earnings report. Can they continue to talk about AI, and can they continue to see high demand to offset lots of the fears right now? That's going to be a very, very big game changer for the markets. Keep in mind that Nvidia has its hands in all these different companies, from Google to Oracle to Tesla to XAI to Meta. They have their hands everywhere. That's why it's going to be a very, very impactful for tech and the overall AI hype. Lots of these companies have bullish ratings, expecting $200 per share for Nvidia. Others are expecting $220 per share, but Nvidia has to offset all of the fears right now for the economy. So looking at this specifically, I actually have a chart right here. This is their total revenue, which is continuing to increase. Let's hope we get a good report for their revenue and their margins look a little bit better. And then we're expecting good guidance as well. There's been insane growth for the last couple of years, and I hope that this continues. Most likely it should continue, but I think that guidance is going to be key, and I can't really predict that. That depends on what they announce. Know this, when it comes to the share price, the majority of the time Nvidia does pump after they announce earnings. So for example, let's go back to Q4 of 2022. Nvidia was down 7%, but since then, ever since 2023 started, we're up 5% after one earnings, then 4%. We're down 1%, up 14%, 24%, and then 0.1% as of Q2 of 2024. And during the last report for Q3, Nvidia saw a crazy amount of volatility. First, the share price dumped 3.6%, then it went up to about 4.8% overall in the green. So the last four earnings technically were green for Nvidia in terms of the share price reaction, right? Ever since Q4 of 2023, we have never had like a very, very bad reaction for Nvidia. It's been continuing to hold up or pump as the reactions. That's a very, very good sign. The majority of the time we were in the green for Nvidia's earnings, so that could be very promising approaching tomorrow. Now, a couple more things about the markets. Know that Donald Trump has this tariff news that's been making a lot of headlines. Why is this important? Well, going down here, let me just say that Donald Trump had 10% tariffs on all Chinese goods. And then we also have about 25% tariffs on most goods for Canada and Mexico, not to mention 10% tariffs on Canadian energy. That was delayed up until March 4th. And then for most nations, we're expecting 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. That's taking effect on March 12th. Now, why is this important? The reason I'm talking about this is because Donald Trump has made some important claims. This is not as impactful for tomorrow specifically, but I would say more for next week. Keep this in mind. Next week is when the deadlines are coming up for his tariffs, and we're going to be looking for some high volatility. Donald Trump is saying that the tariffs are going forward on time and on schedule. He said that during a press conference for today when asked if he would postpone the tariffs. Then he also said that so tariffs will go forward, yes, and we're going to make up a lot of territory, according to Donald Trump. He also mentioned that the U.S. has been taken advantage of by foreign nations on just about everything, and he wants to reiterate his plan to impose reciprocal tariffs. So for next week, we'll be listening to see what Donald Trump has to say and how these tariffs end up affecting things. Just keep that in mind. That's a big piece of news right now. But there's one more thing I really want to tell you guys about, and that is what's happening with sentiment. Right now, people are very fearful. They think the market's going to crash. They think Nvidia is going to crash. Tesla's about to crash. The whole market's about to collapse. That is what the majority of people are thinking right now. And typically when everyone is really bearish, that's when, it's time to turn more bullish. That is typically what happens. I can't promise anything though, because I can't predict or give you guys a guarantee about Nvidia's earnings, but I can tell you this: when everyone is fearful, that's when we turn a little bit more greedy. Momentum is at extreme fear right now. The S&P 500 is approaching a very, very key support. And then I also want to add that the put to call option ratio is going up. We're seeing more puts being bought because the majority of investors are now expecting the market to dump. We're expecting that Right now, the market is seeing the VIX run very, very nicely, but we're at a very, very key resistance, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And besides that, there's a lot of fear. We're extremely fearful. We're expecting a big crash, and we'll see if that ends up happening. I also want to add that there's been a lot of talk about how there's been a virus that was discovered. This has not been spreading, fortunately. And that's the reason why we're seeing lots of these pharmaceuticals and health stocks doing a little bit better, like Moderna and Pfizer. So I just want to call that out. We'll keep this in our minds just to be safe. But, anyways, enough about all those other pieces of news. Let's focus on all of the share prices for Nvda, Tesla, and the others. I'm actually going to do something differently. Let's first talk about Nvda, then I'll talk about Tesla, SPY, and the others. Nvda is the most important one. Remember, Nvidia is a multi-trillion-dollar company. It affects the whole markets. It affects big tech stocks from Meta. It's going to be affecting Microsoft and Tesla, and that's why we're expecting some high volatility. Now, the first thing you may notice is that we have a possible left shoulder, a head, and then a possible right shoulder. If Nvidia gets good earnings, they give us good guidance, and we get a big bounce here. We're looking for an attempt to push back up at least to the 140s for a very, very big bounce. That's the more bullish case, but it's not a guarantee. If they do poorly with earnings, if guidance is not good, we could be dumping below 120 for a big rug pull. Okay, so it could go either way, but considering that the majority of investors are bearish for the markets, and that historically for the last 4 earnings, Nvidia was actually in the green as its reaction, right? Ever since I would say the end of 2023, we've been seeing good reports. We've been seeing very, very strong guidance and positive reactions. The fourth one is right here. We actually saw us dip and then bounce very, very nicely. That was the last time they announced earnings. So we have a history of being green after earnings. Everyone's expecting us to dump, and we're seeing falling wedges on SPY, ES, and the QQQ right now, which makes me suspect Nvidia might bounce. I'm a little bit more in favor of that. I do favor that a tiny bit more, but I can't make promises. Just keep that in mind, guys. Don't throw stones at me in case I am incorrect. I can't, it's earnings. You can't always predict what's going to happen, but I do lean a little bit more in favor of that. So I'll say this: I'm about 55% bullish and 45% bearish. I'm always prepared for anything in case things go south, but I do lean a little bit more in favor of this bounce, and that's my prediction. If I'm wrong, it is what it is, and I would not risk too much. I would manage risks very nicely of playing this, but I'm hoping that they do well and we end up seeing a big surprise. That's what my gut feeling is. If I'm wrong, it is what it is, but we'll see. For Tesla, what else is very interesting is that Tesla's been dumping and dumping and dumping, but notice that when we hit this lower trend line, we touched this, bounced, touched this, bounced, touched this, and then bounced. But just to be safe, if we lose 300, we're looking for the gap fill all the way down to 296. And then if that fails us, if we end up losing and we can't hold above the 300s, we're looking for a dump to 275, then 250 to fill the gap. So keep those levels in mind. But like I said before, we touched this support and bounced, touched this and bounced, touched this and bounced. There's a good chance it may continue to do that. So in this case, we're at support on Tesla. You guys can see at the end of the day, there's buyers who are trying to defend us here. And then also when you look at Tesla on the daily time frame, where we have this 200 EMA as support, the red line right here. Do you guys see that? That's a support which buyers are trying to defend right now. So it's very simple. If Tesla does poorly, if Nvidia does very bad with earnings, if it does not go right for us, you want to see Tesla lose 300 and start dumping to at least that gap fill to 296, and eventually 275 is coming. If we're bullish, you want to see us basically bounce off this trend line as we did many times. This could just be a temporary bullish move before we continue to dump more in March, okay? I'm not saying we're going to bounce forever, just a temporary move. And let me show you some proof of how that could happen. We've been on a downtrend since December. It's been downtrending nonstop, right? Just because there's a downtrend, we don't have to be red every day. There were times we touched the trend line, we bounced a little bit, then we continued to fall. We touched the trend line, then we bounced, we continued to fall. Now we're touching the trend line, so we might bounce before we continue to fall. I hope that's as clear as possible. Just a temporary pump before another continuation of the downtrend. In my opinion, this is a little bit more probable. We're at the 200 EMA. We're at this trend line of support. I think technically it wants to bounce a bit before it starts to dump. Maybe Nvidia is going to be the catalyst. We'll see, just to be safe. I cannot make promises. So be prepared for anything just to be safe. But I do lean a little bit more in favor of us getting a temporary bounce before we continue to fall because of Nvidia. If I'm wrong and Tesla cannot hold 300, then look out for the 296 gap filled, and eventually the 280s are coming for that support at 275. just to be safe, but I do favor this a tiny bit more, us trying to get a bounce just to be safe. So I hope that's as clear as possible. I hope this might be just a temporary move up before we continue to fall. We could still be bearish even if we get a temporary bounce. Why am I talking about a temporary bounce? We'll check out our ETFs and indices, okay? SPY is weak. It's been making lower highs and lower lows, but notice that we're also forming a very, very beautiful falling wedge. So if we lose 589, I think we dump to fill our gap. There is technically a gap all the way down here around 584. So if we get a bad earnings from Nvidia and the whole market collapses, sure. I think that if we lose 589, we're looking for that gap fill all the way down to about 584, and we could invalidate this falling wedge. 584 is going to be our next potential target if we get that big rug pull. Okay. But the bullish case is that no, it's not going to do that, because what if we break resistance, we get back above this level, we retest it, and then we break out like this after Nvidia's earnings. If Nvidia runs and pumps, there's a chance that SPY is going to follow this and push back into the 600s. I lean a little bit more in favor of this, looking at the fact that Nvidia tends to beat on earnings. It tends to run afterwards most of the time. We also are very, very fearful. Everyone's expecting us to crash, and we have a falling wedge. There's lots of consequences that suggest we might be looking for a bounce. I don't know, guys. We'll see just to be safe, but I do have this gut feeling that that's what's a little bit more probable. We get some kind of bounce after Nvidia's earnings, so we'll see. If we lose 589, we're bearish. If we break out of this wedge, we could be looking for an attempt to get back up to the 600s. Could go either way, but this chart is favoring that it wants to bounce a little bit more. So I'll talk about that more tomorrow. The QQQ has the same thing going on. If we're bearish, if Nvidia does poorly, this will have a bigger reaction down. If we lose 506, we're looking for the low 500s. If we get a good report from Nvidia, you want to see this reclaim 516. If that breaks, we're looking for essentially 525 plus. With the falling wedge here, I think the odds are favoring 525 plus as the most likely case. So watch to see if that ends up being the case for us. For the Russell 2000, we have a falling wedge as well. So what a coincidence, we're seeing a bunch of falling wedges. If it's all a trap and if Nvidia does poorly, you want to see this lose 214. But notice that historically, we had 214 on the Russell bounce, 214 we bounced, 217 we bounced, 217 we bounced, and then 214 we bounced. So it loves to bounce off 214 historically. That makes me suspect that we just hit 214 today, by the way. We might be looking for a bounce around that area as we're at support, maybe back up to 220. So we'll see just to be safe. Could go either way. If we lose 214, we're looking for a dump, but as long as we hold it, we could be looking for 220 plus. We'll see just to be safe. ES is on a bit of a downtrend right here. If we end up losing 59.50, we're looking for a dump to the low 5900s. As long as we're above 59.50, if we break out, we're looking for an attempt to get back above 6,000. There's a falling wedge here, but there's potential for us to bounce and get back above 6,000, so we'll see how it goes. ES has a falling wedge, but I hope we get some kind of bounce here. That's a little bit more probable. Hopefully, Nvidia saves the day. We'll see just to be safe, but this setup does favor upside. Same thing with the QQQ. We're looking a little bit more bearish. For now, we've been on a downtrend, but there's a falling wedge developing. So these typically lead to bounces eventually and a big reversal. If we lose 21,000, we're looking for a dump to 20,500. If we could base here, if Nvidia gives us that save, we're looking for an attempt to get back up above 21,500. I lean more bullish, but we'll see just to be safe, guys. It's the same setup over and over again. Bitcoin hit our 200 EMA on the daily. As long as we don't lose 85,000, we're looking for an attempt to get back above 90,000. So keep that in mind. Nvidia is on a bit of a downtrend. As long as we don't end up losing support right here, we have that inverse head and shoulder setup. Maybe it's going to play out with earnings. I don't know for sure. I hope we get a bounce. I would love to see it, but we'll see just to be safe. Like I said about Tesla, considering that SPY, the QQQ, ES, and NQ all have falling wedges and they have potential to bounce, Tesla's also at this trend line of support. It also tested the daily 200 EMA, which could cause a bounce. So we'll see about that. For Apple, real quick, inverse head and shoulder setup, which tends to be bullish. As long as we don't lose 245 tomorrow, we could continue to uptrend for 250 plus. If we lose 245, we could be tipping to 242. So it could go either way, but I'm hoping we try to continue this uptrend for 250. For Netflix, as long as we don't end up losing 950, we're looking for an attempt to get back up towards 990 for a small temporary bounce. So we'll see how it goes, at least moving forward. For MSTR, we're on a bit of a downtrend move here. We have to see if 250 holds. If that holds, I'm looking for an attempt to get back up to 265. So I see potential in this. Celsius is on a bit of a downtrend. We're looking for essentially 26.5. If that fails, I'm looking for 24. If this holds, we could be looking for a bounce. We're at support right now, so it could go either way. Supermicro looks bullish after they just filed their filings that the SEC were looking for. So they got everything done. It's bullish right now. Could be looking for an attempt for 60 plus. Palantir, it hits support at the 200 EMA. We already dumped so much, so typically you do want to see a bounce back up closer to like 95. If we lose 80, we're still bearish. As long as we're above it, we could try to bounce for like 95 plus. Rivian's on a bit of a downtrend. We're at 11.5 is the main support right over here. So we'll see if that holds. If that holds, we're looking for us to get back above the 12s. So give this some time. SoFi is also dipping right here. We're making lower highs right here, lower highs and lower lows. We'll have to see if we could try to hold above 13.5. As long as that holds, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 14.5. So I see this support becoming resistance. It's a very, very key level. So we'll see if 14.5 ends up coming. For AMD, we're on a bit of a downtrend right here, making lower highs and lower lows. However, we'll have to see what the reaction is with Nvidia's earnings. Will we bounce back up to the trend line or not? It all depends on that. I'm hopeful, so we'll give this some time. It's going to basically just follow Nvidia. Same thing with ARM. It's on a bit of a downtrend. We formed a wick right here. There's a big support at 135 and also at 128. I'm hoping we hold 135 and try to bounce above the 140. So we'll see what this does. So keep that in mind. Coin is a little bit on a downtrend. We need to see if this could reclaim 216. If it does, I'm looking for an attempt for the 220s. If we lose 205, we're looking for a dip, but I do hope we could get back with the 216s. So give it some time. For Amazon, we're on a bit of a downtrend right here. We need to see if this can try to hold support. I do think it's going to revisit 215. 215 is previous resistance becoming sort of very, very key level. There's lots of visitations over there. So I think 215 is coming tomorrow, and then we'll see what kind of reaction we get with NVIDIA's earnings. I think that Meta is trying to hold its 200 EMA. As long as we hold 657, it's going to try to push for 674. If we lose this, we could be tipping lower, but I'm hoping we get some kind of bounce, this imbalance. Could go either way, but I'm hoping we get a bounce. It dumps so hard without much of a bounce. It is due for that. There's also a falling wedge on Microsoft. It's not as strong looking. If we could try to get back above like the 400s, maybe it's going to pan out for like 405. We'll see about that. Google's been dipping quite a bit. We'll see if we bounce here as well to get back up to 183. It's very weak though. It could be approaching 175 before it bounces, so we'll see how it goes. GameStop has that head and shoulders very flat here, trying to base at 24. We'll see if it could get a bounce for 25. AMC is pushing a little bit after earnings, could get very close to like 3.4 if that's the case, but it's still quite flat. DJT is dipping to the 22s. We could be looking to see if we could hold support here. We're not really at some key support yet. 22.5 could be where it heads to before it bounces, but we'll see. Now, this is very important. This is the last most important thing I want to talk about. The VIX hit 22 and rejected. It hit 22 and rejected. Hits 20, then rejected. So between, or ever since the year started, basically, right? Ever since we got to 2025, every time the VIX is hitting 22 to 20, it rejects, rejects, and rejects. In this case, we're between that range where we came just under 22. Are we about to get a big rejection? It depends on Nvidia. If Nvidia does well, that could be our sign that that's about to happen. So we'll see, just to be safe. With that being said, the 10-year is dipping a little bit. No surprises so far, as the Fed is once again going to be reacting to data. And so is the dollar. It's dipping a bit. So that could be a good sign for the markets, but not a guarantee. So for Tesla, we're on a downtrend, yes, but we're at this trend line of support and the 200 EMA. Hopefully, we get a bounce with NVIDIA's earnings. I do lean a little bit more in favor of that based off my own rationalization. But please keep in mind, I'm not a genie or a fortune teller. I cannot make promises about the markets. So that's why you have to do your own risk management and be very, very careful nonetheless. So let's hope for the best. Hopefully, NVIDIA does well. I'm rooting for them, and let's hope we get some good earnings and a nice reaction. We'll give this the time it needs. And remember, manage risks and be careful no matter what. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a good rest of your day. Tesla is going to the moon for the long term, despite the short-term fear and downside that Tesla is seeing. Yes, the short term is bearish for now, but the long term is still very, very bright for the company. I'm very excited for what we're going to be looking for, at least as time goes on. With that being said, thank you for listening. Have a good one, and peace out.